Hey guys, it's Will from Your Career Mastery, and today in this video, I wanted to share something that was actually a really awesome win and a massive accomplishment for me in my career that I really just wanted to share with you and bring you on the journey of what this experience was like for me. So essentially what happened was I actually ran my very first ever career workshop where I got a ton of people in the room, some very senior people were in there as well, and we ran through material and I ran the workshop for a good 3 hours or so. Now this was a huge step up for me because for me personally in my career, getting this kind of exposure with senior people and getting all these people in a room where I'm actually the expert talking from a position of authority or meant to be and running the workshop and walking everyone through the content, that's a massive step up for me in terms of my professional development, building my presentation skills and my public speaking skills, but also just building my personal brand in the business that I currently work in, which is a large scale multinational company. So why was this particular workshop important, and essentially what was the format of the workshop? So I work as a senior manager in the digital marketing and the digital sales and e-commerce part of the company that I currently work in. And the core part of my role is to increase revenue and sales for the company by driving growth in e-commerce and digital marketing for the business. But also a really key part of my role is to drive and build capability in digital and digital marketing and e-commerce for the broader business. Essentially, all the IP that I have in terms of digital marketing is not just stuck in my head and centralized with me and the digital team, but it's spread throughout the business so that essentially the whole business gains the benefit of building digital capability. And by building that capability, we're actually able to empower the entire business to grow in the area of digital. So this workshop was all about getting some key stakeholders in the sales, category, and customer marketing teams together to really build best practice digital capability throughout all these stakeholders, both specialists and senior directors in the business. And like I mentioned, this was a massive win for me in my career just to get this kind of exposure with senior leaders. And we had about 30 or 40 people in the room walking through this material over about 3 hours. So it was a lengthy workshop. I personally had never presented for this long. The first half of the workshop, I was talking for a good 40 minutes straight, which is kind of crazy. I've never presented for that long. I've really ever presented for like 10, 15, 20 minutes, so to speak, almost non-stop. I mean, there was some good discussion in there too, but talking for about 40 minutes straight and then having group workshops, that was a new opportunity for me. I'm very happy to say that actually went really well. So again, a quick recap of exactly what the workshop entailed. So it was essentially all about building digital capability for our sales and our related sales teams. We had about 35 to 40 people in the room. It was a mix of 4 or 5 different teams, the senior leaders, so the senior directors from those teams, and all the people that work within those teams were in that workshop as well. And there were 2 sections to the workshop. There was all the content, which I presented up front, so all the slides, walking people through all the content. And then the second part were group workshops. That's where everyone was able to take a component of the material that we worked through and everyone split into groups and they workshopped their own particular component of the content we already talked through, and that allowed them to go away, do their own research and present back to the group their findings so that everyone had a chance to get their hands dirty and really embed that capability into their ways of working going forward. So what worked really well with this workshop? So like I said, it was my first time ever running a workshop of this scale and size and with this kind of exposure. So it was so important that I got it right. So the first thing that worked really well was just massive over preparation. I spent a number of weeks putting all this content together. And the key thing was I knew this content like the back of my hand, but it was how do I communicate it to a broader audience in language that they can understand and in terms that is relevant for them. And also, how do I keep this content engaging and fun? Like I said, there was a lot of slides and a lot of PowerPoint for this workshop. How do I keep everyone engaged? How do I keep robust discussion alive in the room while we're moving through the content? So we massively over prepared. I worked really closely with my line manager to shape the material, shape the story, and really ensure that the content and the structure was really going to be appropriate and tailored for the audience that we were presenting to. And a really key part of that was just making sure that all the slides were very, very visual. So minimizing text and chunks of text where we could, and having really visual diagrams, charts, images, examples, case studies to make it real, but to make it visual so that everyone engaging in the room could hear my explanation of the content, but they could see for themselves on the slides the visual material, and that kept them engaged and it kept the content very, very accessible, which was the most important part. Another thing that worked really well was the structure and the flow. So we took a lot of time to really look at what is the flow of the story we're trying to tell here. And starting with the big meaty bits, the big pillars, the big concepts at the start, and working through the detail as we went. But really just making sure that everyone had opportunity to ask questions and to clarify bits of information as we went. Because like I said, we wanted everyone to step out of that room with a really robust set of capability. Another thing that we did really well was that we set expectations and the goals of the workshop well in advance of creating the content, but also we set that frame at the beginning of the workshop. Literally as we opened up on the second or third slide, we said, all right, cool. Thank you for everyone for being in the room today. Really appreciate your engagement and your time. Now here are the 3 or 4 really important goals of this workshop. Here is why we're all in the room today. And that set the frame because everyone understands what's expected of them. They know what's expected of me. And together, through the content and asking questions and having a discussion, we can look to really tick off and nail those goals that we set as a very clear and very robust, specific expectation at the start of the workshop. And really one of the best pieces of feedback is to start with the goals in mind. You know, when you're preparing content for a workshop or a presentation, ask yourself, what are we trying to achieve with this content? What's the goal here? Who are we trying to persuade? Who do we need to inform? What's the case we're trying to make? And what would success look like coming out of this workshop or coming out of this presentation? Because if you can set those goals up front, it makes creating the content a lot easier, but it also makes it easy for the audience to understand where they need to direct their focus during the day and during the workshop. Another thing that worked really well was actually we had some group work in the second half of the workshop. So I presented all the content up front in the first half, and like I said, in the second half, everyone broke into groups of like 5 or 6, and they each got a specific part of the content that we'd presented, and they had to go away and research that particular piece of content and present back to the group their findings based on our industry that we currently work in. And like I said, this allowed everyone to get their hands dirty, to really embed that capability and really start to look at our industry through the lens of the content that we were teaching in the workshop. But of course, no workshop or presentation is ever going to be perfect. So here's what I would change if we did the workshop over again. So the key thing was, even though we'd allowed a lot of buffer for the day to have conversation and questions, and also things never go completely to schedule, right? When you're preparing content over 3 hours, you never quite understand where the questions are going to come from. Even though you can try and do your best job to anticipate the questions people might have, you never know how much discussion is going to come up on the day. So you need to allow buffer for that, and we had allowed buffer. However, we did run out of time towards the end of the workshop, which was really key part of the workshop because that was the area that we were going to set up. What are the next steps? What are the next steps flowing from the workshop that everyone's going to be aware of so that we could again set the expectation of, we've learned this content, we've done group workshops, here's what's next. But because we're running out of time, we couldn't quite fulfill that component of the workshop. So if I had my time again, I might have cut the group workshops just a little bit finer so that we could allow more time to really wrap up the day, ensure that we could recap all the great things that we'd learnt in the workshops, thank everyone again for their time, and frame what the next steps are they're going to flow on from the workshop. But of the things I would change, those things are quite minor. Overall, I would say the workshop was incredibly successful. One of the best things for me personally was actually straight after the workshop to hear people start using the language of digital and applying it to their own projects and particular work, which is what it's all about. It's not about me being the absolute digital expert and withholding all that knowledge and keeping it for myself. No, a key part of my role is to share that knowledge and build capability with the wider business. And you might think, well, that's giving up my IP, right? That's giving up what makes me special and the value that I could offer the business. But actually, it's the opposite, because this kind of workshop actually went a long way in helping to position me as a digital expert with the wider business. And getting that exposure and that face time with very senior leaders and senior directors in the business will go a long way in building my brand and my expertise in their eyes, which could set me up for really good development opportunities and even leadership positions and promotions later on in the future. Well, I'm Will Vaughan from Your Career Mastery, and if you've got a workshop coming up, again, my best tip is just to over-prepare, but really consider your audience. You want to make sure that you're packaging the content in a way that's engaging, but it's relevant for them. You're speaking to them in language they can understand, because what are your goals going into the workshop? I imagine they're going to be building capability and communicating a really clear message to your audience and landing it. But you need to do the upfront work to put together that story and frame up all your content and make sure that you know it absolutely inside and out. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got a workshop coming up, I wish you the best of luck. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit subscribe. If you've got any feedback, leave them in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.